the Appalachian Mountains. Now, the only question that we've got to really ask is, why do we need it? Alright? Because I get this question all the time. Why do we need it? Because we've got a river. You know, we've got this huge river. Why do we need it? I said, well, the river that you get to see today when you drive across to Florence is not the same river that we've always had. So, think about this. We're at 1818. Let's just set it there, because 1819 is when Tuscumbia is founded. So, in 1818, the river is going to be anywhere from 1/4 of a mile wide to 1/2 mile wide. And in some places, it even, when it floods, can get up to 2 miles wide. Shallow water. So, get this, a lot of people say even when it would flood, in some spaces you can still walk across on dry ground. So, if it floods 15 feet in Chattanooga, you might get 2 feet of flooding in the Muscle Shoals. Why is that? Well, it's kind of this accident of geography, because the river gets really shallow all of a sudden and there's rock on the bottom. So what that makes is the water is not able to eat itself deeper. You're going to have it eating its banks out. So it's going to be a really wide river that's really shallow. And it's going to be really fast moving. So how do we know that it's fast moving? Because, you know, we don't have any pictures of the rapids or anything like that. How do we know it's fast moving? Basically, it's strange because the river takes about, it drops about 250 feet over the course of the day. I'm sorry, I'm using microphone a little while. Alright, so basically, what you're going to find is that the river is going to drop about 250 feet over the course of the state. Now, if that happens all at one time, it's taller than Niagara Falls. So, we've got a very much a sloping river when it goes across the state. Now, here's the problem. 137 of that 250 feet happens between Decatur and Florence. So, the reason why we spell it Muscle Shoals is there was originally a presence of mussels there, like freshwater mussels. That's a prime environment for those animals. Now, you've got those mussels there. Well, everybody started making fun of it because it takes mussels to get down the Muscle Shoals. So, we've got a very dangerous section of river that, here's the thing, if you don't have this, like, as bad as I hate to say it, January flood like we had this past year where the river goes up to 30 feet, you've got a problem. You can't get stuff back and forth up and down the river. So, here's the thing. We have to find a way around this. We've got cotton and things like that that are wanting. We'll have it for ourselves. Sorry. Excuse me. Oh, you coming in? Sorry about that. So, we've got a very fast moving section of water that only is able to have a boat driven down it maybe twice a year. That's a month or 2 months span. So, here's the thing. Up until 1830, 1820, that's not a problem, but, and I'm a Trail of Tears expert, or a Native American expert, so that's what I've done all my research in. Here's the thing. In 1813, Alabama territory makes a treaty with the Creek. And all of this land is ceded in the state, and suddenly a place like northwest Alabama that only has about, I would say, maybe 18 to 22,000 people living in it, suddenly between 1810 we jumped from 18,000 to 127,000. By 1830 we will be at 300,000 people in the state of Alabama. Now, that doesn't sound like a lot of people. That's half the population of Birmingham probably. But at this time, it's a big deal. Now, what are they going to be doing when they get here? They're looking for farmland. Now, if you're farming, it is not just about growing food for your family. You want to export those crops to places where you can make money off of it. Now, let's think about it. We've got Charleston, New York, Boston, New Orleans. Those are 4 of the bigger cities at this time. Now, if you're in Courtland, Alabama, what is going to be the easiest way to get to those cities? You've got to take the river. The only problem is you can't use the river. And people are realizing this. Suddenly they're saying, we've got all this, we can make a lot of money if we could just get it to the place. Now, I'll say, you've probably heard these names, Deschler, David Deschler, Benjamin Sherrod, James Fennell from Decatur. All these prominent businessmen get together in Courtland and Decatur and Tuscumbia, and they say, we've got to figure this out. And just so happens, I want to say it's Sherrod or Deschler who is in Pennsylvania, and they see a rail car system. Now, what does that look like? Is it these engines that we see on the walls? No, it's horse-drawn. But they're being pulled on iron railroads. So it is technically a railroad. Here's the thing, horses can pull 2 to 3 times what they could on the rail, or what they could on a road, and they can pull 2 to 3 times that on a railroad. So he sees the potential to say, we can put cotton on this railroad, run it to east or west end of the Muscle Shoals, put it on a boat, and it gets there a lot quicker than on land or waiting for the river to flood. We can get our payment a lot quicker. So, in 1830, January of 1830, they do other things first, but it never works out. The Muscle Shoals Canal, and if you go to Florence, you can see the canal that runs right alongside the river. It started before this in the 1820s, and it's not finished until, I want to say post-Civil War is actually its date. I'd have to get you a good definite date on that. But, so the Muscle Shoals Canal doesn't work. They try to do these keel boats, but they can't ever transport enough cotton to make it worth it. They're these flat, large, barge-like boats that'll float over the top of the rapids. And so they can hold them at places like Tuscumbia Landing. Does everybody know what I mean when I say Tuscumbia Landing? Okay, so that was one thing. They built warehouses at Tuscumbia Landing and said, we'll just wait for the floods to come. Well, that's not quick enough. People can't wait that long. So, in 1830, they take this huge step and say, we're going to build 2 miles of track. I know what you're thinking. That's not very big of a step. 2 miles of track from the Tuscumbia Landing at the mouth of Spring Creek all the way to Tuscumbia. Now, when they do that, suddenly traffic between the landing as far as passengers and freight becomes a lot easier. And so what they're going to see is the potential of having a railroad that connects a definite place like Decatur. Now, these 2 miles of track are going to be formed as the Tuscumbia Railway Company, and 2 years later, less than 2 years later, they are going to absorb that company in what we call the Tuscumbia, Courtland, and Decatur Railroad. Now, have we all heard of that term? Tuscumbia, Courtland, and Decatur. So, these are our 3 major terminals. There's still the foundation blocks of the original depot in Courtland. The original depot for the TC&D is going to be somewhere over here. We don't know exactly where it was, but it was over in this location. This is the second one built. But this is a historic depot because it's the second one. Now, here's the thing. All right, y'all. So, we've got a railroad now. It takes about 2 to 3 years. So, 1834 is when the railroad is finished. Now, I'm taking too much y'all's time. So, these are our major points, Decatur and Tuscumbia. Now we have a way that connects the river at its deepest points of Decatur and Tuscumbia Landing so that we can ship goods, people, whatever we need. And I didn't mention this about the Tennessee. A lot of people say the Tennessee River, why is that important to get to anywhere? Well, the Tennessee can carry you to the eastern seaboard, or the Tennessee dumps into the Ohio at Paducah, Kentucky, and then you can travel down the Ohio to the Mississippi and shoot down to New Orleans. Now, that trip takes no time at all with the railroad. So, your profit days actually returned a lot. Now, as far as the original railway goes, you've walked on it today. If you've looked at these antique cars, you can still see the track buried on 5th Street that runs in front of the building. Does anybody know the old path of the railroad? Or have you might live in front of it, behind it. Basically,
Are you talking about the very first railroad that went?
Very first.
Into Muscle Shoals?
Yes.
Part of it runs under our house.
Yeah.
That's
Okay.
up on 3rd Street.
Okay.
They veered over because they couldn't go up with Presbyterian churches on 4th, and it
Yeah.
went over somewhat onto 3rd, and our house was built in the 1800s,
Yeah.
and it's under our house. And we
Yeah.
find those little spikes that are this long in the yard all the
And
time.
when you tour through the museum, you'll be able to see the spikes that go along with that rail.
We brought some of those up here.
Okay,
We
well
found- We found them in
Well,
our
then
yard.
thank y'all for your contribution. Y'all help me out. So this is and that's one of the original path. Now, a more modern path that we will talk about as far as a classic railroad goes is 5th Street right here.
Yeah.
And I want to say it starts turning about High Street, South High Street down here,
Yeah.
and angles
It goes
off
that
towards
way.
the cemetery.
This
Turn.
one goes past our house, up past the commons, and cuts through a field up there.
Yeah.
And goes into Muscle Shoals and goes on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly it.
That's
So
We
we're
want those.
well, my company is actually trying to do signage for all that, so I may be coming to talk to y'all.
Well, I'm glad you put a sign up out there.
Okay. So it's just this is my point. I mean, all of us have a connection somehow to the railroad, whether it's where we live, the river we drive over, whatever. And that is a very physical connection, but we have a very social connection here with the railroad that we don't always realize, and it's the Trail of Tears. Does anybody know that this railroad is one of the only instances where railroads are used on the Trail of Tears? So, the story, and I say the story, I've documented it, got Army records to support it and everything. In Decatur, the railroad comes in, but that is a stopping point for it at that time, 1838. So, we're not connected to major cities. It runs specifically from Decatur to Tuscumbia. So, the Army is bringing barges of Native Americans in from the Carolinas, Georgia, Tennessee. That corner of states right there is Cherokee Nation. So, over the course of the Trail of Tears, 2,300 Cherokee will be brought through Tuscumbia land and Tuscumbia town. They're actually able to walk freely back and forth to Tuscumbia while they're staying here. So, we've got 23 Cherokee. Believe it or not, Tuscumbia goes even further back than that. The traditional Trail of Tears starts 1836 and ends 1838. The earliest signs of natives that are moving through Tuscumbia to go to the tribal nations in Oklahoma is 1827. Now, have y'all heard the story of when the first batch of Creek come through here? The town of Tuscumbia actually feeds them at Spring Park, and we recollect that with the Oak Classic Festival, second weekend of September. We'd love to see y'all there. Now, here's the thing: is that, and if I get tongue-tied, please forgive me, because it's very confusing to relate this to people because we're so used to it. But think about this: these three groups of Cherokee, the largest one being over 1,000, or roughly 1,000. Basically, they're going to get to Decatur in the dead of night while it's raining, on a barge on the river, get out and stay overnight in this dark warehouse. So, there's no lights in it. They're terrified because, if you've ever left home and recognized you would never see it again, that's the feeling they've got. So, the next day they get up, they go to the depot at Decatur, which is, has anybody ever went to a historic structure in Decatur, the old State Bank?
Mm-hmm.
Right there on the corner off of 72 now. So basically they would have walked past that bank. In that deep railroad trench right there is where the old depot was. Right along that cut where that curve is that goes to the river. So they would have walked there, boarded a train. Here's the thing, we've got a lot of first-hand accounts from this. A lot of them talk about half of the natives are crying because, it's them leaving their home. But then the other half are awestruck because it's the first time they've ever seen a railroad engine before. So they are loaded on the open cars. If you've ever watched the old John Wayne Stagecoach Western like that, that is very much what a train car looked like back then. It was just an open carriage that was pulled by a locomotive. So they're loaded onto these open cars. They get to Tuscumbia, and they see the old depot, and they get to stay here for a couple days. And you can hear them talk about chicken dying. Does everybody know that story? Chicken, the old Native American that fell off the train and passed away. They pretty much located his grave. Yeah, Neon Parker can tell you more about that. I've not got to look into that just yet, but I'm on my way. Now, any questions so far? Like I said, I'm used to teaching school. Please give me questions. Okay. So that is our biggest instance of cultural significance to the railroad. I don't have to mention much about the Civil War, just because we can all recognize the importance of that. Because, I mean, when you think about it, the South and a lot of literature and scholarship on the Civil War says the South loses the war because of its vulnerability because of the railroad. So when you hear about places like Corinth, Mississippi, Shiloh, and even into New Albany and New Station, and the Battle of Little Bear Creek, which you can read more about over here. All of these battles and engagements are centered on overtaking the railroad because they know that if they can take over these railroad hubs that point north and south, like Decatur, Tuscumbia with its major hub on the railroad, and places like Corinth that are these huge railroad centers that can point you towards New Orleans, towards Charleston, wherever. You take over those places, you can't get supplies to your troops. And on top of that, there are things like standard gauge, which is the width the tracks are apart. If you don't have a standard set on that, you can't always get a train to run on two sets of different tracks. So that can be a problem. If suddenly a train that's built to run on 2.5-foot track runs into 3-foot track. And that's just an example. That's not how far they are apart by any means. I don't know those exact measurements. So Tuscumbia with its major battles is a part of that. Now, I will go ahead and tell you, this is the end of my formal talk. I'm ready to take questions. Any questions you have?